I moved to Maple Creek to start over. I'd spent most of my life in cities, claustrophobic apartments, noisy neighbors, and that constant low hum of stress no one ever talks about but everyone carries. When my lease ended last spring, I packed my truck, grabbed my dog, and drove until the skyline disappeared behind trees. That's how I found it, this forgotten edge of suburbia, tucked beside a creek and wrapped in silence. My house was nothing fancy. One floor. Faded shutters. But it had land. Real land. Enough space to grow tomatoes, maybe build a greenhouse one day. And there was a small wooden bridge at the edge of my property, crossing the creek to the gravel road. It was old, but sturdy. I reinforced it myself, plank by plank. That bridge was mine, both literally and emotionally. It felt like the line between my past and the life I was building. For the first 2 months, everything was quiet. People waved, but no one pried. That's exactly what I wanted. No drama. No noise. Just the wind in the trees and the sound of my dog's paws on the porch. Then Karen moved in. She arrived with noise. Her SUV pulled up like a parade float, windows down, 2 poodles yapping, voice loud and confident. "Hello, neighbors. I'm Karen, your new HOA president." She said it like she was announcing a royal title. She handed out glossy pamphlets about neighborhood cohesion and visual consistency. She scheduled mandatory lawn audits. Lawn audits. On her first weekend, she invited the entire cul-de-sac to a meeting, complete with folding chairs, iced tea, and a dry erase board outlining her vision. I didn't go. That's when the letters started. At first, they were vague, your property may be out of compliance. Then they got specific. Unauthorized wooden bridge. Structural risk. Immediate action required. No name. Just HOA letterhead. It was nonsense. The bridge was on my land, maintained with my money. But Karen didn't care about boundaries, only control. And control was exactly what she was about to lose. The first time Karen noticed the bridge, I was weeding my front flower bed. She stood across the creek, hands on hips, face pinched like she'd just smelled something sour. I watched her stare at the bridge like it personally insulted her. No hello. No wave. Just that look. Later that day, she showed up unannounced. No knock, just the click of her heels on gravel as she approached the edge of my property line like it was a crime scene. That structure, she said, gesturing stiffly, wasn't part of the original development blueprint. It violates the aesthetic of the neighborhood. The aesthetic? I asked, wiping my hands on my jeans. She nodded, lips tight. This community has visual integrity. That bridge isn't HOA approved. Was it permitted? I blinked at her. It's on my land. Built decades ago. I've maintained it. There's no issue. Karen pulled a pamphlet from her tote like a sheriff with a warrant. Page 4. Any exterior addition visible from public or shared access is subject to review. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The bridge had been here longer than anyone in this neighborhood, maybe longer than Karen's entire career in bossing people around. The next day, she came back with a clipboard. I watched from my porch as she took measurements, snapped photos, and scribbled furiously like she was preparing for trial. I wanted to tell her to leave. I didn't. I knew she was itching for a reaction. 3 days later, I found a violation notice taped to my mailbox. Unpermitted structure, immediate attention required. No signature. No contact info. Just the HOA letterhead and a fine for $75. $75 for existing on my own land. I wrote back. Certified letter. Detailed my rights. Attached property lines, county records, even an engineering note about the bridge's stability. I thought that would settle it. A week passed. Then another letter came. Same format. Same threat. Only now, they gave me a deadline. Remove the bridge by the 30th or face escalated enforcement. I started to understand. This wasn't about safety. It wasn't about standards. It was about power. And Karen needed to prove she had it. What she didn't know was, I've fought bigger monsters than her. And I don't burn easy. I remember exactly when it arrived. A thick, legal-sized envelope stamped with HOA letterhead and a flood of formal language. I held it in my hands like a grenade, feeling its weight, literally and metaphorically, like a threat that could blow apart my new life. The return address matched the community office. The absence of a signature made it more ominous. Inside, the document was meticulously formatted, date, infraction number, reference codes I could barely decipher. Violation notice, unpermitted structure, it declared in bold type. Beneath, a list of alleged breaches, Section 5.4, unauthorized architectural modification. Section 7.2, failure to obtain committee approval. Section 9.1, endangering community aesthetics. Each clause felt like a blow. Then came the penalty. A fine of $300, due within 15 days. A threat of escalating fees, legal action, and remediation procedures at owner's expense. They even added a vague reference to local ordinances, as if they wanted to scare me with jargon. I imagined courtrooms, lawyers, and cameras flashing. I paced my porch, the letter clutched in my fist, dog whining at my side. My mind raced. Could I really owe an organization I barely knew $300 for fixing my own property? The bridge, my bridge, had never caused harm. It had connected me to hope. Fury rose. I felt a hot pulse behind my ears. This wasn't just about a bridge anymore, it was about power, control, and respect. I sat at my kitchen table, lit by a single lamp, and laid the letter beside my laptop. I opened a blank document to draft my response, detailed. Civil but unyielding. I attached scanned copies of every receipt, itemized each repair, and illustrated line by line why each code reference was misapplied. I addressed the letter to Ms. Karen Thompson directly and signed it in bold ink. I even included a polite note inviting them to inspect the bridge in person, free of charge, if they had further concerns. Early the next morning, I printed the response on crisp ivory parchment. The envelope felt heavy in my hands as I walked down the gravel drive. At the office door, I paused, steeling myself against the glare of the acrylic nameplate, Maple Creek HOA. I slipped the envelope into the drop slot and heard it whisper against the metal. That moment, quiet and charged, felt like dropping a bomb. I turned away, shoulders squared, ready for whatever came next. Back on my porch, I poured a cup of coffee, its warmth steadying my nerves. The creek babbled on, uncaring, untouched by HOA politics. I watched the horizon, thinking about the bridge, the letters, and the battle unfolding between rigid rules and personal freedom. This was more than property lines now, it was identity, respect, and the right to build your own path. I didn't sleep that night. But I never sleep well when I'm ready for war. And as dawn broke, I knew the real fight was just beginning. No retreat. No surrender. It was inevitable. Once Karen saw that I wasn't backing down, she ramped up the pressure. A week later, I received another letter, but this time it wasn't just a violation notice. This one had a date. And a location. An invitation to the HOA monthly meeting, where they would address the ongoing concerns regarding my bridge. The letter made it clear. If I didn't attend, the next step would be a formal hearing. And I knew from the way they worded it, this wasn't just about a bridge anymore. This was about Karen proving she was in charge. Her power had been challenged, and she wasn't going to let that slide. I wasn't the kind of person who typically enjoyed meetings. I preferred avoiding confrontations, especially with strangers. But something about this felt different. Something about the way Karen was forcing my hand. I wasn't going to let her push me around anymore. I was going to go. I was going to face her, face the committee, and make sure they understood who was really in the right here. The meeting was held in a large conference room at the community center, a sterile space with fluorescent lights and beige carpeting. As I walked in, I was hit with a sense of suffocation, long tables filled with people scribbling notes, whispering to each other. Karen was already seated at the head of the table, her posture straight, her eyes scanning over the agenda. She didn't look at me when I walked in. I sat at the back, as far away from her as possible, and waited. The meeting began with a dull discussion about neighborhood gardening plans and a proposal to raise the community dues. I could barely focus. My mind was preoccupied with what was about to happen. Then, Karen's voice broke through the murmur of conversation. Next, we'll address the ongoing bridge violation at 225 Maple Lane. She looked over her glasses and smiled in my direction. It wasn't a kind smile. It was a smile that said she had control over everything happening next. The room went quiet. Ms. HOA, Karen continued, we've given you multiple chances to correct this issue, and yet, the bridge remains standing. This is not just an eyesore, it's a violation of our community standards. We are asking you to remove it immediately, or we will take further action. I stood up. The words tumbled out before I could stop them. I don't think you understand. This bridge has been here for decades. It's not hurting anyone. It's a part of this land, my land. I have every right to keep it. I paused, my voice shaking but steady enough. This isn't about a bridge. It's about control. And I won't let you take that from me. The room was dead silent. I could feel everyone's eyes on me. Some of them looked uncomfortable, others judgmental. But none of them spoke up. Not a single person in that room, except Karen, seemed to care what I had to say. I looked around, waiting for anyone to back me up. But it was clear, Karen was running the show. The chairperson cleared his throat and spoke in a tone that was supposed to sound reasonable. Ms. HOA, the HOA is responsible for ensuring all properties within Maple Creek adhere to the rules, and we've tried to work with you on this. But if the issue is not resolved soon, the HOA will be forced to escalate further. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was the same thing I'd been told in every letter, every email, and every whispered conversation behind my back. They were going to keep pushing until I had no choice but to give in. But I wasn't giving in. Not this time. I'm not removing the bridge, I said, my voice stronger now. And I'm not backing down. I turned to leave the room, ignoring the eyes still boring into my back. Behind me, Karen's voice rang out. We'll see about that. As I walked out, I knew that this fight was far from over. The battle lines had been drawn. And the HOA had no idea who they were dealing with. I couldn't sleep that night. The moon was high and the air was silent, except for the rhythmic chirp of crickets. I lay in bed, mind racing with thoughts of Karen's ultimatum. Remove the bridge by the end of the month or face consequences. I stared at the ceiling, imagining scenarios, legal hearings, fines, maybe forced removal by HOA contractors. But I didn't expect what happened next. At precisely 2:30, I was jolted awake by the sound of splintering wood. My heart thumped in my chest as adrenaline surged. I threw on my robe and crept outside, careful not to wake my dog. The gravel driveway crunched under my slippers as I moved toward the creek, where the bridge stood. Moonlight revealed two figures crouching on the bridge, wielding power tools. A circular saw roared, biting through one of the planks. I recognized the uniforms, white shirts with HOA embroidered on the chest, contractor badges pinned to their pockets. They were dismantling my bridge, plank by plank, under the cover of darkness. I stepped forward and shouted, "Hey! What do you think you're doing?" The saw blade stopped mid-spin. One of the men glanced up, eyes wide, saw me silhouetted in the moonlight. He wiped sweat from his brow and said, "Ma'am, you're trespassing. You shouldn't be here." He pointed toward the road. I felt fury ignite. "This is my property. You have no right." My voice broke as the other man stood, raised a metal pipe, tapping it against his palm. He said, "We have HOA orders. Move along, or we'll call the sheriff." I hesitated, torn between backing off or confronting them. My anger surged, my voice shook. I demand you stop this now. You have no legal authority. They exchanged a look. Then, with mechanical efficiency, they resumed cutting. Wood shavings flew into the creek. I stepped closer, but they refused to acknowledge me. They worked faster now, taking chunks of the bridge as if erasing its existence. I felt tears prick my eyes, rage, helplessness, disbelief crashing through me. The bridge, my symbol of second chances, was being destroyed by people paid to protect the community. And Karen, she orchestrated this midnight destruction. I sank to my knees on the damp grass as they finished. With a final roar, the saw bit through the last support beam. The bridge gave way, splintering into the water below. The contractors grabbed their tools and vanished into the night as quickly as they'd arrived. I knelt in the wreckage, moonlight reflecting off broken planks floating in the creek. My hands trembled as I pressed on the wood, as if hoping to fuse it back together. My dog padded over and nudged my shoulder, whining softly. I hugged him, fighting the despair that threatened to swallow me. That night, I vowed, they hadn't heard the last of me. If Karen thought midnight sabotage would intimidate me, she was gravely mistaken. I would rebuild it brick by brick, plank by plank, no matter the cost. My resolve was stronger than any saw blade. The night of the HOA summer gala was warm and fragrant with barbecued ribs and fresh lemonade. I didn't bother to go. I've never cared for forced small talk or recycled jokes about lawn care. But I heard the party was in full swing when Karen drove up, hair perfect, blazer pressed, her white SUV gleaming under the string lights. I watched from my living room window as she parked, stepping out with a glass of wine in one hand and a phone in the other. She wore that same self-satisfied smile she used on every innocent neighbor, like she owned the whole cul-de-sac. She stayed late, smiling through every toast, nodding at every compliment about her leadership. When the gala wound down, she climbed back into her SUV and hit the ignition. The headlights cut through the fog that had rolled in off the creek. Karen reversed smoothly, turned onto the gravel road, and headed toward my bridge, only the bridge was gone. The St. George contractors had finished their dark work. She eased forward confident. Then the front wheels slipped. First a soft squeal of rubber, then spinning in place. The gravel gave way to mud, and the SUV sank until the chassis settled over two deep ruts where the bridge supports used to be. She stomped the accelerator, but the tires just dug deeper. I saw her frantic through the windshield, hands turning the wheel, face going pale in the dim glow of the headlights. She honked the horn. She shouted into her phone. Nothing worked. I stepped onto my porch, just out of earshot, and sipped my tea. Her SOS call went straight to the HOA emergency line, but even they couldn't send help, no bridge, no access. She tried to back up, slid forward, backed up again. Every movement sank her deeper. In the distance, I heard a chorus of car doors. Neighbors emerged, flashlights bobbing, phones recording. Some laughed quietly. Others shook their heads, eyes wide in disbelief. No one rushed to her aid. They remembered the midnight sabotage, her tone-deaf letters, her rigid orders. She pounded her steering wheel and shouted curses I'd never heard in polite company. The air filled with her frustration and fear. That delicious moment felt like summer thunder, inevitable and electrifying. Karma had driven straight to her doorstep. I never sent help. Instead, I stood there and watched her struggle until the HOA towed tow truck arrived, carrying cables heavy enough to yank her out, but not in time to prevent the nuisance. She would owe a hefty removal fee, thanks to her own decree. The next morning, the videos were everywhere, Karen stuck in mud after bridge destroyed. Some edits showed her flailing arms, others captured the neighbors' smirks. In every clip, the exhausted, mud-splattered Karen stared down the lens as if begging for mercy. That night, under a neon sign flashing Maple Creek HOA, the tales of her humiliation echoed around the neighborhood. And I went to bed content, knowing my bridge might be broken, but my spirit was unshakable. By the time I was finished, the garden was more than just a garden. It was a statement. A place of freedom. I stood back and admired my work, feeling the weight of the past few weeks lift off my shoulders. In that garden I had reclaimed my power. In that garden I could breathe. When Karen arrived 2 days later, no doubt with a clipboard and her usual air of superiority, she froze at the sight of my front yard. The once plain, orderly space had transformed into a riot of color and life. She took a step forward, eyes narrowing. "Excuse me, Miss HOA," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "This is a violation of HOA standards. You're not allowed to." I stepped out of the door, a quiet smile playing on my lips. "Actually, Karen," I said, "this is my garden. And it's none of your business." She sputtered, trying to find words to regain control, but there was nothing she could say. She couldn't touch this. She couldn't take it away from me. Not now. Not ever. And as I stood there, watching her struggle with words and authority, I realized something. Karen had underestimated the power of nature, the power of freedom, and the power of a woman who had nothing left to lose. Her defeat wasn't in the bridge. It wasn't even in the mud. It was in the garden I had created, in the silence between us as she realized she had no power over me at all. Weeks passed after my garden had bloomed into defiance, and for a while, Karen stayed quiet. The HOA had retreated, but I knew it wouldn't last. She would never let me, never let anyone, get away with undermining her control. It wasn't just a bridge, a garden, or even a petty rivalry. It was power. And Karen wasn't about to let me steal it from her. One Thursday morning, a new letter arrived. No thick envelope this time, just a single page folded neatly. I opened it slowly, the words glaring at me in bold black ink. "Dear Miss HOA. We regret to inform you that the HOA has decided to proceed with legal action against you. A formal hearing has been scheduled regarding your violation of community guidelines. The subject of this hearing will include unauthorized bridge construction, unlawful garden modifications, and other ongoing disturbances to neighborhood order. The trial will take place at the community center on May 25 at 10 a.m. Failure to attend will result in further penalties. Sincerely, Maple Creek HOA Board." I stared at the letter, the world tilting under my feet. A trial. A real one. I was being forced to defend my right to exist as I chose, to build, to create, to live. It was beyond absurd. The HOA was going to put me on trial for my bridge, my garden, my very essence. I crumpled the letter in my fist, feeling the anger rise like a tidal wave, threatening to pull me under. But I refused to drown. This was it, the final confrontation. I wasn't going to let Karen win. Not now. Not ever. The day of the trial arrived. The community center was packed, mostly with neighbors I hadn't seen in months. The chairs were arranged in neat rows, and the air felt thick with tension. The whole town was watching. I could feel their eyes on me as I entered the room, the whisper swirling around my head. Karen sat at the front, her perfectly pressed suit making her look even more powerful, more untouchable. She greeted me with a thin, cold smile, her eyes gleaming with the satisfaction of knowing that she held the upper hand. She knew how this would play out. She always did. I took my seat, hands trembling in my lap, but I wouldn't let her see that. I wouldn't show her fear. The trial began with the HOA board laying out their case, an endless list of complaints, accusations, and petty grievances. They described the bridge as a hazardous structure, my garden as an eyesore that violates aesthetic standards, and me as an outlier who simply didn't belong. As they spoke, I could feel my chest tighten. This wasn't just about a bridge or a garden. This was about my right to live in my own home, to exist on my own terms. And every word they spoke was a reminder that they were trying to strip that away. Then it was my turn. I stood, took a deep breath, and faced the crowd. My voice was steady, though the fury burned in my veins. "Your Honor, members of the HOA," I began, my eyes locking on Karen. This trial isn't about the bridge. It isn't about a group of people who believe they have the right to dictate how others should live. I paused, letting my words sink in. I'd been living in Maple Creek for years. And until now, I've respected the rules. But I will not bow to tyranny. I will not allow anyone, not Karen, not the HOA, to take away my right to create something meaningful. To make my home my own. I could feel the room shifting. Some people looked uneasy, others nodding in silent agreement. I could see Karen's face darken, her grip tightening around the edge of the table as if she could strangle the words out of me. I built that bridge because it was mine to build. I planted that garden because it was mine to plant. And if that offends your delicate sensibilities, then I'm sorry. But I won't apologize for living my life in a way that brings me joy and peace. No one should have to ask for permission to be happy in their own home. The silence in the room was deafening. For a long moment, no one moved. I could see the wheels turning in their minds. Maybe they were really realizing, that this wasn't just about rules. It was about respect. And for the first time in months, I could see that Karen had lost control. The chairperson cleared his throat. "We'll take a brief recess." The room emptied, and as I stood, I felt a strange calm wash over me. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time, it felt like it might be mine to win. I had put my heart into those words, into every action that had led me here. And no matter what happened in the next few minutes, I had already won. Karen's expression was no longer smug. It was tight with frustration, a mask of control slipping away. I met her gaze one last time and smiled, feeling a sense of peace settle over me. Whatever the outcome, this trial was hers to lose.
The morning of the final hearing arrived with an unexpected hush. I felt like a weight on my shoulders, and my pulse echoed in my ears. I took the seat near the back, gripping my notes tightly. The HOA board filed in, led by the chairperson with a stern face, and Ms. Karen Thompson at his side. She wore a cautious expression now, her earlier confidence replaced by brittle tension. When the chairperson called the hearing back to order, my heart pounded, but I refused to look away, meeting Karen's gaze with unwavering calm. He spoke first, summarizing the board's case one final time with practiced precision. Then he cleared his throat and announced the verdict. "We find in favor of Ms. HOA," he said, voice echoing in the silent room like a gavel. Murmurs rippled through the audience as relief washed over me. Gasps and whispers spread like wildfire. The bridge remained mine. The garden stayed. The HOA's demands were nullified, and I felt a surge of vindication. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the outcome settle into my bones. When I opened them, I saw Karen's face, pale, lips pressed into a thin line, eyes flicking to the floor. She had lost. Power drained from her posture, shoulders slumping under invisible weight. A satisfied calm well up inside me, steady and fierce. I stood and addressed the room. My voice was calm but filled with conviction, resonating off the walls. I thanked the board for a fair hearing, and I urged my neighbors to remember that community meant cooperation and respect, not rigid control. I spoke of shared dreams and common ground. Some faces softened, others nodded, and a few offered applause, tentative but genuine, like seeds of solidarity sprouting. Later, outside in the sunlit courtyard, neighbors approached me with handshakes, hugs, and apologies. They admitted they'd been afraid to speak up, but seeing the truth set them free. Mrs. Lopez brought me homemade cookies, Mr. Chen offered to help rebuild any damaged boards. I realized then that the real victory wasn't the bridge or the garden, it was restoring trust, kindness, and the spirit of community long buried under rules. As for Karen, she submitted her resignation from the HOA board that afternoon. Word spread quickly. By evening, her desk was cleared, her name removed from committees. She left in silence, her SUV carrying away the last piece of her authority as she drove off the gravel road for good. The next day, the HOA voted in a new president, someone chosen by the people, not imposed with threats. New bylaws were drafted to prevent such abuses of power. balance returned, and a genuine sense of belonging blossomed in Maple Creek. I walked back to my property and crossed my intact bridge, pausing to look at the vibrant blooms in my garden dancing in the breeze. I felt gratitude, the hard way but enduring. The line between personal freedom and communal harmony had been redrawn, stronger and clearer. And I knew no force could take that away. Always.
It begins with me and a handful of neighbors, hammers in hand and determination in our hearts, gathered at dawn. The old wooden planks lay in splinters across the creek bed. Karen's sabotage had left more than broken wood, it had cracked trust. But today, we were going to mend both. I'd spent the last few days planning every detail, the steel frame, the treated decking boards, the proper permits, the communal lunch. I wanted this bridge to last longer than any petty grievance. More than that, I wanted it to symbolize resilience. Before sunrise, Mr. Chin pulled up with his pickup loaded with steel beams. Mrs. Lopez arrived with coffee and pastries. The Smith twins rigged the welding gear while the Rodriguez family cleared brush. As the sun peeked over the trees, we locked arms and began. I cut the first bolt, the sound echoing like a drumbeat. Each neighbor took a piece of the structure. We measured, leveled, welded, and bolted. Conversation flowed. Jokes, memories of easier times, hopes for the future. No HOA rules here, only cooperation. By midday, the skeletal frame stood firm. We paused for lunch beneath the half-built span. The air smelled of grilled chicken and fresh bread, mixing with sweat and gasoline. I looked around, these were people who had once been silent in the meeting room, anxious to stay invisible. Now they laughed, shared tools, and called me by name. After lunch, we installed the decking. Steel against wood, modern and sturdy. The finishing touches, sealant, handrails, non-slip treads, were added with careful hands. When the last bolt clicked into place, the bridge gleamed in the afternoon sun. I stepped onto the new deck, my dog at my heel, and crossed to the other side. My heart swelled. This was my land, but it belonged to all of us now. A place of unity, not division. A line we'd drawn together, stronger than any HOA notice. Crowds gathered, neighbors with cameras, curious passers-by. I pulled a ribbon taut across the entrance. Mr. Chen and Mrs. Lopez held each end. With a collective cheer, I cut it. The ribbon fell, fluttering into the creek. Laughter and applause spread across the bank. I raised my hammer in salute. This wasn't about vengeance. It was about starting over. About taking back space, and making it ours. The bridge was more than steel and wood. It was a promise. As dusk settled, lanterns lit the path. Neighbors strolled across, greeting friends on the other side. Children ran up and down, testing the handrails. I watched, content. Maple Creek was mended. And me? I leaned against the railing, breathing in the crisp evening air, thinking about how sometimes a broken path leads to a stronger one. The bridge Karen burned was rebuilt by hands united. And that made all the difference. In the months after, the bridge became Maple Creek's beating heart. Neighbors picnicked under its beams, childhood laughter echoed down the valley. Every plank stood for solidarity and shared triumph and hope enduring.